recording. All right, welcome to I Have Been Wondering with the one and only Jael Richardson. I have the honor, the privilege to be in the presence with somebody that I really look up to and I really admire. And I'm going to talk about how much I look up to and admire in 1 second. But first, let me read the bio of Jael Richardson. Jael Richardson is the best-selling author of The Stone Thrower, a book columnist on CBC's Q, and the founder and executive director of the Festival of Literary Diversity, also known as The Fold. It is a festival based in Brampton, Ontario. Her debut novel, which you would see on her screen, is Gutter Child, which was released by HarperCollins earlier this year, and it has been number 4 for the past 4 weeks on the best-selling books across Canada. And apparently Jael loves number 4. Hi, Jael.
Hi, Danny. I do love number 4. I wore it all through university on the soccer. I used to play soccer. That was my big thing. And so I wore number 4 from for as long as I can remember. So it's pretty funny.
I'm pretty happy for you, honestly. I read the book. I fell in love with the book. I listened to the audiobook as well. I have been obsessing about your book for the past month. I have been talking to friends. I've been talking to strangers on the street while keeping 6 feet apart. I have been just talking about your book nonstop. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. When I came to see Farzana's and then you asked me to join, I was like, yes, I get to be part of the club. I'm so excited.
Thank you. How about we jump right into it? I have a question for you. So, hey, Jael, I've been wondering about building a fictional word in a relationship to the world we actually live in. So midway through Gutter Child, I realized that your novel wasn't a fantasy, despite the dystopian narrative. It felt like an echo to the world that we live in, and its characters' actions, expectations, longing were realistic to our world. I have to admit that closer to the end, I was waiting for the revolution. I was waiting for that typical moment where a system of oppression falls and the oppressed find the light at the end of the tunnel. But my friend, you are not interested in the typical, are you? Yeah, I think you're offering me something that is extremely realistic, which I really loved. It really resonated with me. It left me thirsty for more. I want 5 more sequels, please and thank you. So can you tell me about that intention in building the word around your characters? How did you decide to infuse our reality into the dystopian world that you created? And what made you decide to go through with this narrative that others might veer away from?
Yes, all of the things. So I wrote this right after writing a memoir about my family and about I had spent years researching. And so I've been looking into the civil rights era and my dad's story. And so writing a dystopia and creating a world for me was a couple of things. One, it was a way to get away from facts and being rooted in these very real places that people are familiar with and that you have to describe and be aware of in particular ways. It gave me a freedom. So that was part of it. I think the other part is I wanted to do a bit of an experiment. I had a question that was really burning for me. And it was sort of, what does it look like when you realize you're living in a world that's not built for you, that's not built to protect you or care for you? When do you realize that? And what happens to you when you realize that? What kinds of choices do you make? So I was fascinated with that. And then, of course, I was looking at it from a very particular lens. I was thinking about the Black community in particular and how the African diaspora, the way that we've been spread out across the world, has affected us in our relationship with one another, how we've been affected by colonization, and all of the impacts long-term that happen from there. And so the world was, and a dystopia in particular, felt like the best place to navigate this question and also explore issues in the Black community, because if you place a story with a character who is Black in Canada, or you place a character who's Black in Jamaica or the United States or UK or an African country like Cameroon or South Africa, when you place a story like that in those places, there is a particular kind of politic that surrounds that character. And I wanted to think about some of those issues, but without being rooted to those politics, those things. I wanted to talk about them very precisely on a relationship level, on a community level, not on this is what happened in 1952, and this is what happened in this particular country, and this is what this particular group of Black folks experienced. And so Gutter Child focuses on the life of Elamina Dubois. She's the main character. She is of Soci background, as you find out over the course of the book, but she is described as a gutter child, a term she hasn't generally used to describe herself because she only has one scar, and most gutter children have two. And so the question at the beginning is, what happened, why, and what is she going to do about it? And so that's sort of how I went about navigating that question.
I think what I really enjoyed, to be honest, as I was looking at the word that you created, is that it is a dystopia, but at the same time, it depends on who's looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Because from the perspective of others in the same narrative that you're presenting, it is a utopia. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on who is telling the story. So the fact that you chose Alamina to tell the story from her place of this in between the gutter children who have two scars on each palm, and between the mainlanders, the white people who who are benefiting from the gutter system, you end up with two different stories that you could tell. You could tell a utopian story about a system that really is working with you, working for you,
Mm-hmm.
from your perspective, or you can tell a dystopian story from the perspective of somebody who comes from the gutter, where the system is literally designed to bring you down, to break you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting you say that because I think it was always really clear to me that Elamina had to be the voice that navigated it. In the story, she's one of 100 who's been raised on the mainland, and so I needed her to not know a lot about the world so that she could come at it in some ways from the perspective of a mainlander, but also understand the world in a particular way, having been looked at differently in the world. So she's been raised by mainlanders, but when she arrives, she is in every way a gutter child, and all the students know it, and she just has to figure it out. And so there I think that's a really significant thing to think about. The perspective, who's navigating the world tells you everything about the world. Is it a utopia? Is it a dystopia? Is it, a negative look at our world, or is it realistic or positive? And those are a lot of things that I was weighing as I was going through. And I was really thinking about language in particular, calling them mainlanders versus Soci versus gutter child instead of using terms like black and white was really important because there's such a language of power in that word, white and black. There's such a thing that's put on us as people of color to be these colors like from a crayon box, and yet white folks get this very pristine, very beautiful, very clean word used to describe them, and honestly I hate it. I hate it in my own life, and so I wanted to create a world where those words weren't in existence, and where I could use other words that demonstrated that kind of power dynamic. We're mainlanders, we are center, we are important, you're gutter, and that's bad. And I wanted to really get people to think about how language influences how we see each other, and to have Alamina have to explore that as well.
And that made me think, to be honest, like, thank you for saying that. That's very
Mm-hmm.
insightful. And that made me think of, um, when I arrived to Canada, I didn't think of myself as a person of color. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
told me that I'm brown until I came here to Canada, and somebody was like, "You're brown." And then navigating to understand who I am as a person of color in a society like Canada, by itself was my own challenge. But also the fact that I, like, in winter, if I didn't like go tanning in like salons, I end up being quite pale,
Yeah.
almost sickly. And people were like, I would say to somebody like, I'm a person of color, and they would be like, no, you look white. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? So it's it really is beyond the color of our skin. I think it is about our heritage, our connection, but also our place in the forced upon us hierarchy that
Yeah.
is in our society, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I've only ever lived in a world where I've only ever lived in places where I was not the majority, right?
Mhm.
So, uh I've only ever known what it's like to be othered and pushed aside. And my mother-in-law said something very similar. She was raised in the Caribbean. She's like, I didn't know I was Black till I arrived in Canada,
Mhm.
because in the Caribbean, everybody looked that way, and she's actually quite fair for someone from the
Mhm.
Caribbean, and so she
Mhm.
was actually in a higher position. She was in a more esteemed position in the Caribbean because of shadism. And so it's interesting to hear her talk about that, similar to what you were saying, Danny, about, realizing that, like, oh, I'm othered, I'm something else other than the norm or whatever.
Mhm.
And that's been a big thing for me to think about. What I mean, for a long time, I didn't know if I wanted to be Black. I certainly didn't like the word, didn't like
Mhm.
it being used to describe me. I went to church and we would sing about Blackness and sin and evil and darkness. And I was
Yeah.
just like, and then you're going to call me that? Like, no, thank you. And so I had a really tough time with it, because I was also sort of buying into the way I was raised, in colonized in education, to think that, like, Canada was a really great place, and
Mhm.
was really welcoming, and all those things that, uh, is both true and untrue at the same time, to be quite honest.
I think I'm going to end the segment here on that note. I think it's a
Mm.
beautiful
Nice
note.
happy note.
Nice happy note. Yay!
Get,
Couldn't with the problem. All right. I'm going to ask you to read, but before
okay.
you jump into it right away, I'm just going to ask our guests. Thank you so much for being here today. If you have any questions, if you're enjoying the reading, I want to see you chat here, please, and thank you. I want you to write something for me and JL, so we know that you're there. This is very lonely. I'm literally talking to a wall in my office. So please, your connection with us is really important. So please, just like send your happy thoughts, your questions at us, please, and thank you.
Yes. I
Uh,
love questions.
and with that note, I'm going to escape here and let you read a bit for
Read.
us.
Okay. So I had a long conversation with Danny about what to read. This is like my great predicament every time. And I think most of you are new to me. I see a couple people that may have been at another event, but most, I think, are quite new. So I'm going to read the first chapter, and then maybe for the second reading, I'll shake it up a little bit. Um, the driver looks in my direction, full of worry. Her lips are red, glossy, and pouted, and there's a crease in her forehead, like she's the one with problems, not me. I stare out the window, wishing I could go back and put my old life back together, which is impossible, I know. So here I am instead, hours away from the only home I've ever known, and driving up a long gravel road through a tunnel of trees with branches that reach down like fingers, hungry for touch. This is Livingstone Academy, Miss Femia says, as we pull up to a grand white house with black shutters and a door that's green like a swamp. The car slows to a stop under a droopy willow, and I step out in what feels like a whole different world. I take one deep breath and close my eyes, and when I open them again, Miss Femia is standing in front of me with her tight bun and waxy mouth. She takes my hand in hers, rubbing my scar with her thumb, the hideous X on the back of my right hand that's ugly and raw. She sighs, and I wonder if it's sadness in her eyes, because it's hard to tell with mainlanders. Pity looks very much the same. I know this wasn't the plan, she says, but let's make the most of it, hey? Her voice is high and hopeful, and I hate the way it sounds, like forgetting the life I had is my best option, like that's even possible. I really think you might like it here. I think your mother would have really liked this place, she says. I want to tell her that what mother would probably like is to be living instead of dead, to be back home with me instead of wherever it is she is now. But Miss Femia doesn't have children, and people without children always share silly bits of wisdom, like it will all go to waste if they don't. Yes, let's make the most of it, I say, turning up the corners of my mouth as high as I can manage, which isn't much. You can do this, Elamina, she says, wrapping her fingers around the doorknob, holding the swamp-colored door with her back. You can find happiness here. But happiness isn't something a kid like me can afford to hold out for. The main entrance of Livingstone Academy is large and impressive, with tall columns and a wide carpeted stairwell that curves like a bow. Framed pictures of open landscapes and wide fields hang on brightly lit walls. At least it's not the gutter, I try to tell myself as I turn and take it all in. Miss Femia, a man says, emerging from a hallway in a sharp tan suit, followed by a girl in a gray dress with a crisp white shirt underneath. The tall man with slick brown hair takes large steps across the room to greet us, kissing Miss Femia on the cheek and smiling down at me after. I stare back with wide eyes because, other than Mother, no mainlander has ever looked at me this way, like they're actually pleased that I've arrived. Elamina, it is a tremendous honor to have you here at Livingstone Academy. I'm Headmaster Samuel J. Gregors, but Mr. Gregors will do just fine. He smiles and pauses for a moment, raising his chin in a way that makes me wonder if I'm expected to curtsy or applaud. While the circumstances that brought you here are less than ideal, I believe that Livingstone is exactly where you need to be, he says. Elamina, I sincerely believe that here in our tidy little academy, you'll find a home that propels you into an excellent future. He looks down at the girl in the gray dress, whose hair is pulled into two round ponytails. Her skin is like mine, the color of oak trees and coconuts, as Mother would say, whenever she rubbed lotion onto my skin that smelled like a spring rain. This is Josephine. She's one of our best students, he says, nodding in Josephine's direction as she takes a step forward so we're close enough to touch. Josephine tilts her head, taking in my shaved head and raising one eyebrow. Mother started shaving my head when I was 5 years old because I had curls that refused to submit to her, hair that grew out instead of down. It's impossible to deal with. There's just nothing else I can do, she said, lifting me onto a tall stool where a pair of scissors lay resting on the countertop. She cut one messy ponytail, and when I gasped, she cut the other quickly before grabbing a razor to take the rest. When she was done, when tiny black curls were scattered around her like feathers, she held my face between her hands, tilting me this way and that, marveling at the richness of my skin held in her moon-colored palms. She smiled, like she was proud of the result, the smoothness, the even shape, how clean I looked. Perfect, she said. You look perfect, Elamina. A beautiful ebony goddess. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell, and I believed every word she said. You are perfect, beautiful, a goddess. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. I saw a head that was naked and shorn like a bird born too soon, one that would never grow up and fly. And I knew that she had lied. You made me ugly, I yelled. And when I said those words again, shrill and loud, she called me vain and selfish. Elamina, Miss Femia says, placing one hand on my shoulder. Mr. Gregors just asked you a question, dear. I look up, my heart racing wildly like I've just been caught doing wrong. I'm sorry, sir. Never you mind. It was a very long drive, he says, waving one hand in my direction like it doesn't matter at all. Josephine will take care of you today, and I'll meet with you tomorrow after breakfast, after you've had some rest. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. Don't be sorry, and don't be late, he says, pointing in my direction. It's a basic tenet of the work we do here to always be on time. I consider tardiness a sign of disrespect. Let's not get off to a bad start. Yes, sir. Josephine, show her around and do it proper, he says. No shortcuts, leave nothing out. Get her a uniform and be sure to take her to see Nurse Gretchen. I want her ready to go when I meet her tomorrow. I'll have Violet inform Miss Darling that she'll be away for the duration of the day. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, Josephine says, nodding her head. Miss Femia moves closer, placing her hands on my shoulder and opening her red mouth, like she's going to say something. But when she looks back at Mr. Gregors and Josephine, she presses her lips back together, like now is not the right time. Miss Femia, I say, hoping she'll reconsider and say what's on her mind. It's not important, she says. You've got enough to worry about right now, Elamina. Go on with Josephine. Get settled in. I'll swing by another time. She wraps her arms around me, and I don't squeeze back or cry, but when Miss Femia whispers in my ear, you'll be fine, I feel a stick in my throat that hurts so bad it makes it hard to swallow, like a knife cutting from the inside. I'll see you soon, she says. But somehow I know this is a lie. Josephine leads me down a long hall with high curved ceilings, our footsteps clicking against the floors. When she reaches the tall set of doors at the end of the hallway, she places her palms on the brass panels and turns toward me, the X's on both of her hands standing tall. For a moment, I'm not sure I'm breathing at all. You ready? She says. But I don't answer. I just stare and follow her slowly through the doors, feeling somewhere deep in my gut that this is all wrong. I should turn and run. The dining hall is filled with long tables and wood chairs. It reeks of fried meat and steamed vegetables, and we enter the room. Students in matching gray uniforms turn and stare. But I just look down at all of the hands that look just like Josephine's, 2 scars instead of one, like mine. I stop, and when Josephine turns to me, I whisper the only words I can manage, my throat still thick and tight. I don't belong here. You're all, I'm not a gutter child, I say. But Josephine just hands me a tray and shakes her head, like I've got a lot to learn. This is what you're missing, like the feed, the like energetic feed of clapping. That's the one thing.
Yes.
We gotta have like our own clapping sounds installed in Zoom. So it's just like press it and it's like, yeah.
Well, I'm sure people are enjoying. I see some people sending the emoji, the reaction of clapping, which is amazing. I am going to send some clapping myself here. I really, really enjoy. I was actually just telling Jael right before we started how like I read the book and then I listened to the audiobook. Like I read the book twice in the last month. I was obsessed. Um, but I think that there's something to be said about the way the author reads the book, where they pause, how they present the line. It just gives it a different taste, different life. So I really appreciate being here to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so I have some questions for you. I see a lot of engagement. Melissa here says, I could listen to you read the entire novel. All right.
Thank you, Melissa.
All right. So I have some questions here, but again, folks, if you send me questions, please shoot them through the chat. If I have time, if I can ask all of them, I will do so. But let me start with a question that I have just for you. And this is a bit of a confession. So over the past couple of months, I gotta say, I started to seek out your advice on things. Like I will text you out of nowhere being like, hey, do you have a minute? I honestly was naturally attracted to like the knowledge you present, the wisdom that you present. I really did feel it. And I started to see you, to see the support that you're offering as a mentor. I have many mentors. I'm very grateful, quite thankful that I live in a place where I have all of those mentors. And I noticed that mentorship is important to you. It's a value that you have in the book. Elamina goes on and meets a lot of mentors throughout her journey. So I was wondering about mentorship in general, and I was hoping that you can talk a bit about that. Also talk about maybe who do you consider your mentors? Who are the folks that you look up to? But also like just talk about mentorship. Just
mentorship. So I think there's a couple different kinds of mentorship. So on one point, and this is something I stole from an author who I can't remember, so I always say that and can't give them credit, but somebody else told me this. They said that every book they write has a mentor or mentors. And I feel that very much so. With every book I write, there's a book that really shapes a lot of the decisions that I make in the book. And so there are books that are mentors to Gutter Child, like Sula by Toni Morrison is definitely like a book mentor. And Hunger Games, ironically, was a book mentor for sure in writing this. And then I think there's also mentors, like people you go to when you're feeling a bit lost or unsure about a career decision or a plot decision. And ironically for me, the people who were most integral in this book were all Black women. And when you read the book, you'll probably see how that plays out in a variety of ways. But
Yeah.
one of the things that was really interesting is I did a podcast with Glass Bookshop in Edmonton, Alberta,
Mm,
and Makta Malatu, she did the interview, and she asked me about Black women who had shaped me when I was younger. And ironically, it wasn't until she asked that I realized I really didn't have very many Black women in my life when I was younger. My mom is Black, but is much lighter than me, and we had a lot of white friends, white family members here in Canada. So I wasn't around like a wealth of Black folks in general.
mm,
My aunt and my grandmothers would have been the closest thing, and they all lived in the States, so I didn't see them that often. It wasn't until I got married to my husband, and he has like so many relatives, that I started to be in the presence of Black folks that were my age
mm,
and older, and older, right? So multiple generations of Black women. So for this book, and I mentioned them in the back, Bianca Spence, Kenizia Lubrin, Jay Pitter, Leonie Gavalsius. These are women I went to for conversations that weren't necessarily always about the book, but things they said significantly shaped the content and the plot. They don't even know it. They don't even know. They probably forgot all about it, but there were sentences that shaped a whole plot line in the book, and conversations. And so they were really important mentors for me in that way. And I would say also, Lawrence Hill has been a really big supporter for me from my very first book. And he is somebody that like I can text regularly with questions. And it's been really great to have that connection with him.
to have Lauren's phone number.
I know. He texted me once and I freaked out. I had to like put the phone down and be like, oh my gosh, because he reached out to me. And then we sort of started exchanging more regularly. We had exchanged emails, and I had been, spent some time with him at a retreat, but like the phone number was like the next level. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Kim Mardenson is asking, thank you so much for your reading. I'm intrigued by the idea of books being mentors. I
Mm.
also am, and I want to talk about this. So can you share a bit more about that, what
Yeah.
that looked like for you? It's a new
Yeah.
concept for Kim.
So when I have a book mentor, I keep that book really close. First of all, it shapes like a bunch of decisions usually at the beginning of the book. Sula by Toni Morrison was the first dystopia I read. It was a dystopia about the Black experience in the United States. And I was fascinated at the way she could like make a whole new place and talk about things that were important without me having to know that place. Like if it's a book set in Chicago, I always feel like, well, I haven't been to Chicago. I don't really know where this is coming from.
Mhm,
But the Sula felt like, I was right into the story right away, because as a reader, you have the exact same information as everybody else. Nothing.
mhm,
And so I was really fascinated by that. And so when I have a book mentor, I turn to it for ideas when I get stuck, and also for examples of what I'm trying to do that I might be struggling with. So
mhm,
Hunger Games was really important because I had never written a dystopia. I didn't know how to do world building or how to share the world building and the backstory. And so I would read Hunger Games and be like, about what page did she decide to explain the districts? And did she start to explain like the elimination process?
mhm,
And how many pages did they take to like explain that before they moved back into the plot? And so I would pull the book out and flip through the pages and like, oh yeah, okay. And so as I'm working through my draft, I have this book that's helping me. Another thing that I do a lot is I don't know how to begin and end chapters
mhm,
sometimes. And so I
mhm,
would open and be like, oh, how do they begin a chapter? And so I would kind of start the same way. And when you do that, like at draft 3, it feels like you're stealing ideas. But when you edit it, like, and you work your way through and you find your own rhythm, there's no sign that those books have ever been a part of your process, really. So that's what a book mentor is.
I never thought of it as book mentors, but I can think of the way that you're describing, because I just finished writing the Foghorn Echoes. It's coming out next year. I'm very excited about that.
Yay.
But for example, I was so freaking reluctant to describe gay sex scenes. Just
Mm.
sit down and write gay sex scenes. And I don't know why we always end up talking about sex on this podcast, but here we are.
I have an idea. No, just kidding.
But I literally like I would have a full hole. Like I can see the emptiness on the page, being like, this should be a gay sex scene, but I don't know how to write it. It is
Mm,
so annoying. And then I read Cleanness by Garth Greenwood, and he talks about gay sex all the freaking time. The guy is just like
mm,
talking sex, sex, sex everywhere.
mm,
And just the fact that he was so nonchalant about it in his writing, in a way, opened a key for me, like
mm,
almost handed me to like, just write
mm.
it and don't be like, there's a difference between the dynamics of writing a sex scene and actually writing a believable sex scene that
Yeah.
has a meaning behind it, if that makes
Well, and I think if you felt held back and you felt restricted, it's
sense.
probably because you are. And when you read someone who is more open, it
Mhm,
gives you permission to be more open and it can sort of unlock what you've been holding back because you feel like I'm the first one. Nobody's ever done this or people don't do this. And when you
mhm.
read someone else, you're like, oh, his is way more, his goes way further. I'm a conservative in this case, right? So you could sort of like it just gives you the landscape to pace yourself at whatever pace you want. That's what I would do. I'd read like the most extreme stuff and then I'd be like, well, it's not that, so it's fine, because I'm like super skittish with any sex scene. I'm just like, like it's so
Yeah,
bad.
it's funny. Like I can talk about sex until tomorrow morning and like be quite open about it, but putting it on a freaking book is just so freaking
Yeah,
difficult. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So back to my questions. Um,
Okay.
I see that Glenn here asked a question. However, I read the question and I don't understand it, Glenn. So if you can expand on it a bit, we can let's
Oh,
give it
okay.
a
The
minute.
nation question. How does it
Yeah.
feel speaking to the nation, speaking as a nation?
So maybe
So
if Glenn can
okay.
expand on that a bit, and then
Yeah.
we can talk.
Expand more because Glenn, I'm super excited to talk about nation and nation building in a book versus nation building in reality. Got lots to say. So just give me the parameters so that I stay in some kind of lane because I'll go. I will go.
It's all right, awesome. Well, while Glenn is working on that, do you
Okay.
feel a responsibility to write a certain story, JL?
Mhm.
Or to make it a bit more engulfing, we all, as authors of color, should write whatever the fuck authors of color want to write about. But at the same time, don't I feel cornered sometimes into writing personal narratives, writing identity narrative, in right there, and I wonder sometimes, like, yes, there's the overwhelming pressure from the world around us to talk, for me to talk about Syrian refugees because I am a Syrian refugee. But is there a limitation that I'm putting on myself and forcing
Mm.
myself to write specifically about gay Syrian refugees? Do you feel that you are limiting your own self to write specifically about
Hmm.
blackness? And do you think of that as a limitation to begin with?
I have realized I actually don't have as much control over the stories that I want to tell as I thought. You
Mm,
know, if I could pick the story that I would write that would be, number 4, maybe number 1 on the bestseller list, um, it would be maybe different. It would maybe be happier. It maybe
mhm,
have different things. And so, there's a little note at the front of the book about, taking care of yourself as you read it and pausing if you need to, because it's about a system of oppression. And of course, in a system of oppression, there are moments of joy for sure, but there are also moments of struggle and difficulty. And so um, I wished at times I was writing something different, but
mhm,
it was the only story I had. I literally, about 4 or 5 years in, was like, this is dumb. This is a terrible idea. It's a horrible book. I'm not going to write it. And for a whole year, I was just like, I'm writing something else, but nothing came to me. And so I realized I have to finish this book in order to get to the next one, even if this book is terrible.
mhm,
So, um, so I don't feel a pressure. I almost feel like the opposite, like the stories that come to me, I wish I wasn't writing them. I wish I was giving something else. I also will say the pressure I feel once I accept that this is the story, I did at one point decide like I really like this story and I'm happy to finish it. But there was a moment with my editor where she was like, okay, I want to talk about the ending. And it's not the ending that's there now, it's another ending that I had. And she was like, we got to find like this moment of hope. Like, how can we give hope? And it was this long conversation. And I kept asking her questions because I did not understand what she wanted. And then I was like, I went home, and this is, I think maybe Kanisha or Jay, I can't remember who I had lunch with, but one of them I had, and I was talking about it. I was like, I don't think I care about giving people hope. Like, I don't think that's part of my opinion on, I don't. And then I said, am I obligated to give people hope? Is that like writers are obligated to give readers hope at the end of the book? And I was like, I don't know. And so I went back to her and I just said, no, like all these things that you're saying, that will not be part of it. And she's great. It wasn't like an argument per se. It was more me just realizing this was a moment where I had to claim the shape of the story and the drive of the story in a way that was very much about me being Black and her being white, and me having a particular experience that she might not understand, and trying to change her own perspective, not just other readers too. And so it turned into be great. And so it's so funny when people call the book like a book of hope. I'm like, yes, look, I gave it to them anyways, whatever.
That's amazing. It is interesting because I also have been having that kind of conversations with my editor for the Foghorn Echoes, because my ending is quite bleak. To be honest, my ending is extremely bleak. And then David Ross at Penguin was like, "Hey, let's talk about that for a second." And I think we managed to find a middle ground with the endings.
Yeah.
That is amazing. But
I
yeah.
love being asked about it. Like, I think it's great when, I don't mind when an editor says like, have you thought about this? Because sometimes you haven't, and it can change and shape the book in good ways. I actually had a more complete ending, I will say. I had an epilogue before, and right in April, May of last year, which of course was like chaos, I decided to take the epilogue out, and I told my editor, and she was like, what? And like, the hope question was one thing, but this was like next level. She's like, I need a day. And we ended up doing it and agreeing to it. And it was fine, but it was very much because I just felt like we were in such an uncertain time that I had to think very carefully about what I was giving people and what I was doing, what I was asking people to question. And I just said, I don't think it's the type of story that needs to be wrapped up with a bow. And I'm not ready to wrap it up with a bow. So,
All right. So there's
okay.
hundreds of questions right there. So Carrie Jenkins is asking you, Jael,
Oh
is
my
there
gosh.
anything you have found the same restriction or restraint to write like Danny with gay sex? By the way, I'm not restrained about gay sex. Not anymore.
Just writing it into books, and now you're freed up. You've been unlocked. I am actually very wary of trauma. It's not that it's that I think really carefully about the scenes of difficulty for the characters, and I try really hard not to overdo it, overlay it with like so sad, so sad, so sad. Because even when you put a character of color in any situation that could be perceived as sad, the book is determined to be like the most sad thing they've ever read. So I try and be very I'm a little bit weary of moving through really traumatic moments. But I'm finding it. I'm finding a way. I also like probably will never write a sex scene. Not a very detailed one, I think, because I can't even read them very well. So I don't know. And I just embrace that about myself. I just say, like, I am here. It is who I am. It's fine. Right. It's fine. I'm a child. It's fine.
When the book comes out and my book comes out, it just skips chapter 6 then, please and thank you.
It's funny. I've read plenty of books, but I do like, my warning at the beginning, like pause and take breaks. That's how I go through sex scenes in books. I'm like, whoo, 2 sentences. My face starts getting red and warm. And I'm just like, I just don't know what to do. If I'm driving in the car, I remember reading a Heather O'Neill book in my car on the open road by myself. And I was like looking around as though people knew I was listening to. Anyways, too
Oh
much,
my
too
God.
much.
All right.
Um,
Glenn is back. I'm going to read both his
okay,
question and
okay.
his explanation. So thank you, Glenn, for humoring me. Your question is, how does it feel to speak to the nation in quotation while also speaking as the nation in
Mm,
quotation?
mm.
Um, and his follow up is, I put that nation in quotes on purpose. I'm thinking of you and your expertise on Q, being a literary
Mm.
reviewer, but also thinking of the communities you highlight to a cross Canada audience. Also, please just go as you wish on nation building. Thanks. I love that question. Please go ahead. Ciao. Feel
Okay,
free.
so in the context of nation, why I was quite obsessed and excited that you even put it in there, quotations or not, is because when I started working on the book, there was this moment where it was after the Trayvon Martin case, and George Zimmerman got off,
Mhm.
was acquitted, and Trayvon Martin was the boy with the hood who got killed on his way home from the convenience store, and my dad said when George Zimmerman got off, he said, "Of course," I was really surprised. And my dad said, "Of course he got off," in this way that was like, duh. He said that the laws were built with George Zimmerman in mind, not Trayvon Martin's. And it was this moment where all of a sudden I'm picturing all those pictures of like founding fathers in the United States, like crafting the Constitution. And you realize, a group of white men built that Constitution thinking about their needs, who they were, what they were afraid of, what needed protecting, and from whom. And so suddenly everything made sense in a whole new way. And part of Gutter Child was me building a nation and making decisions almost like, in the sense, a colonizer. How do I build this story and this structure, create a nation that is built to protect one group and punish another? And then what happens in there? What happens in on the mainland that's different or similar to colonization in North America, to colonization in African countries? And so it was really strange, because it wasn't until I was about 2/3 of the way through that I realized how easy and hard at the same time it is to build a nation that reinforces itself over and over again. That
Mhm.
when there's a hole or a gap, it just fills it with another law, another rule, and the laws just come after one after the other. And if you're from the other group and you're trying to change those laws or come against that system, how impossible it is, maybe.
Mhm.
And so what was fascinating is I got to the end of the book and I was like, I don't know how to undo this. I don't know how to make the revolution happen.
Mhm.
And so it was really interesting to do that. And I think, in thinking about picking books for CBCQ and on another front, I'm constantly aware of what it looks like to build and to put certain things in the forefront, and to hide or suppress or not pay as much attention to another voice. And so I'm constantly trying to like look at the lists that I'm bringing forward and think about what I've learned that's shaping what I'm doing. So one time I remember thinking I think I had done two Black authors, and I was like, well, I can't do another Black author. Like that's not right. And then I realized that the Black authors were very different. They were from different continents, different countries. And I had been trained to think of Blackness as a monolith, that if I have a Black person, I've covered the Black story, and now I've got to move on to this story.
Mhm.
And so I had to reshape that thinking. And so that is how I will answer that question.
I, I
Hopefully it said something.
I think it said a lot of things. Like actually, Glenn was just like wrote WOW. Just he was wowing all over the place, and I
Mm,
kept getting hit by like fantastic ways um, of you looking at the concept of nation in the
mm,
book at Q as you're presenting other Black authors. I think all of that just made a lot of sense to me.
mm. Thank you.
I have another question. They're just coming in, my friend. They're just like
Anna Maria had one about the
about the prequel. That's where
prequel.
I was going. So if you
So
were to write a prequel to Gutter Child, which character would you focus on?
So Anna Maria, this is hilarious because my brother is obsessed with the idea of a prequel. Like I keep telling him it's not going to happen. And he's just like, please, please, please. He really wants the story of the 100 and
Mhm.
how that, where they are and what happened to them to come out. So who would I focus on? I don't know. It's a tough call. I mean, I think I would probably maybe tell a bit more about the hill. That
Mhm.
might be what a prequel would focus on, is what life is like over there. Because, and I say this because in the book there's not a lot about it, and I'm currently working on the sequel,
Mhm.
and there is not a lot about it. So I think if I did a prequel, that might be what I would explore.
Nice, nice, nice.
Yeah.
All right. If you folks have one last question, shoot it my way. But I have my last question that I'm hoping that you would answer today. So while on the topic of all of this,
Glenn, there's no prequel. There is no prequel. The only way the prequel's happening is in some TV deal, I think.
I'll call Netflix right away. There we go. Um, so when do we stop though? So when are we, as authors of color, supposed to just let go of the call for representation and just
Mhm.
write without that responsibility we put upon ourselves or others put upon us? Or is it put on us by publishers, by editors, by readers, by the people who are right now in this Zoom call?
Mm. I have a hard time with this one because I don't, at this point in my life,
Mhm,
I feel like I have a really good sense. Well, I feel like I listen to myself really well, and I write what comes to me. And to be honest, I don't have a good sense of how that will be received. When I was working on Gutter Child, and I would say all the way until maybe like a week into book sales, I was like, I'm not sure people will actually like it or that it will read well. Like I really had no concept of how it would be received. I don't think actually there's a couple people who blurbed the book that I'm really grateful for. Wab and Cherie and Omar Lakad and Zalika and Taya Lim. Um, and when I got their blurbs, I was very weepy because I really, really, really genuinely didn't know how people would receive it. I didn't know if people would be offended. I had no perspective. I only had this compass that said, this is the story and this is how you write it and this is what you do. That's all I had going with me. So it's hard for me to know anything else but what I have to write. And so I don't necessarily feel a pressure, and I don't know how to advise someone who feels that pressure, because I think what you should just do is write what's inside of you
mhm,
and to work on your craft. I think that writing is so hard that if you try to do it for anybody else, it's just going to be even harder. And who wants to make something hard harder? So I think for me, I would just say, like, if you've lived a life maybe where you focus on pleasing other people and satisfying other people as a priority, maybe writing is the place where you can stop doing that and you can really embrace just writing for yourself. Because it's so hard too, right? You can write a really great book and it doesn't make a bestseller list, and it's a phenomenal read and it's not on awards, and it can be really discouraging and disheartening, and you start to think why. And I think the why is because you have to. I think don't do it unless you have to, and if you have to, write what you're given, and love it.
mhm. I I'm going to end that. I love literally every single thing that you just said. Yeah, like no, I'm not going to end there. I'm going to actually say something. Like I asked this question quite a lot to every author of color that I interview. I ask them either in private or face to face, but at the same time, the question is not is for me because the answer I'm looking for is that what you just said.
Mhm,
Um, I feel like I want to tell the Syrian story. I feel like I have a lot of Syrian stories inside of me.
mhm.
Um, there was once a person who once uh, heard about my next book, and it's also about gay Syrian refugees, and was like, "Didn't you just write one of those?" Um, I'm like,
There's
"Yes,
only one. You're only allowed to write one of them, Danny. That's it. Then you got to write something else. Unlike
exactly."
other writers who put out book after book about the same kind of people doing the same kinds of things. Like, I think that's the interesting thing, that we feel this pressure about dipping into where we're from and revisiting things we've revisited in some ways in some other book. But yet you see authors who have phenomenal financially careers,
Mhm, mhm,
who are just literally writing the same story, sometimes with the same characters,
mhm,
sometimes different. And I don't think we should I think we should have the same freedom. We should have the exact same freedom to write. I will write about Black folks in some way in every book I write, I imagine. I can't, I remember reading Eden Robinson's, the one about fighting. Yeah. And there was no Indigenous people. And I was like, what? You can do that? I was like, this is so strange. And yeah, and she explained how and why. And it was funny because when she explained it, I was like, oh, I don't think that interests me. Like it was interesting to know that I could, but also then I realized I probably never would. Like it just wasn't going to be part of my work, my process at this point. And so I think that like, yeah, I'm going to write what I write. And one of the challenges I have is I'm mostly like my family's American. And so I actually lean easier into American stories, which has a particular kind of commercialism to it in our relationship with the US that I feel uncomfortable with. I think that's another reason why I like dystopia, because it removes me from the borders that I don't really believe in a lot of ways, but it also removes me from the feeling of guilt about like whatever I feel guilty about.
Well, thank you so much for your wisdom. I really appreciate it. Thank you
Thanks for
for
having me.
answering all of those questions. If there's a question that I missed, I am sorry. But now we are going to go back and read some more. I hear
I
that
forgot about that.
I know Jael Richardson is going to read something that I asked her to read. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I leave you folks with Jael. And I go bye.
Okay, so I'm going to read. I've never read this section before. Um, so, let's see how this goes. Hopefully it's not too long or too boring. Okay. So this is a little bit later in the story. At this point, Alamina's been given a special status of the school as a redcoat. And that means she's in charge of sort of keeping an eye on her peers. And so she has followed Josephine somewhere to see what's up. I pause at the doors of the field house and stare into the dark, waiting for things to take shape. The wood posts, the stalls, the tools that hang on the walls. But all I see is black. And when someone grabs my arm, I jump and clasp my hand around my mouth to keep myself from making a sound. Did you follow me? Josephine whispers, holding on tight. For weeks, I had been watching Josephine at night, waiting for her to sneak out so I could find out where she went that night they put the dead rat in my bed. When she stayed awake tonight, watching the other girls fall asleep before stuffing her sheets with pillows and heading for the back stairwell, I did the same and followed her to the field house in my red coat. Ow, Josephine, you're hurting me, I say. You are such a rat, Elamina, she whispers, shaking my arm. Did you even check to see if you were followed? Did you? I say. And she grips my arm tighter, pinching the skin. Did Mr. Gregors ask you to do this? Did Lewis? Have you told them? She says, and I can hear in her voice a desperate kind of anger. What have you told them, Elamina? I haven't told them anything. You're lying, she hisses. I'm not lying. I came on my own. No one knows I'm here, I whisper, pleading for her to believe me, frustrated that that I can't be mean and ruthless like Lewis after all that Josephine has done. But you're going to tell. That's your plan, right? She says. Josephine, relax. It's okay, someone says from the dark. I squint into the shadows as a figure with wide shoulders and a thick, stocky frame moves closer. I hear a snap and then a hiss that glows into a flame as Rowan lifts a match to the base of an oil lamp, raising it up so his face is covered in an eerie yellow glow. Go on, Josephine, he says. Josephine looks at me, then back at Rowan. But Rowan, she could... I'll take care of it, Jose, he says. Josephine clenches her jaw and looses her grip on my arm. But when Rowan nods for her to go on, she sighs and heads deeper into the field house, leaving the two of us alone. What are you guys doing here? I say. I'm about to show you, Elamina. But first, I need to know if you can keep a secret, or if that red coat means you're with Lewis. I can keep a secret, I say. He holds the lamp out with one hand so the light spreads wide around us, pointing his elbow in my direction the way mainland men do when they're asking a woman to dance at a fancy party. I slide my hand into the bend of his arm, pressing my lips tightly together to keep my smile small. Being a redcoat has advantages, Elamina, he says, as we make our way down one hallway and turn down another. But the real advantage is knowing when and how to use it. At the far corner of the field house, past horses and cows that shuffle as we pass, a second lamp flickers in the corner stall. I can hear voices whispering low, Josephine and one other, maybe more. So you won't tell, he says, stopping and leaning in close. I won't tell. I promise, I say, closing my eyes at the gentle feel of his breath against my skin. David, Josephine, and Violet are sitting on blankets that are spread across the concrete floor. And when Rowan leads me forward with his hand pressed gently against my back, they immediately stop whispering. Josephine doesn't look at me, and when David makes room for me to sit down, Violet glares at him like she doesn't want me here at all. Welcome to our gathering, Rowan says, sitting down next to Violet. No way in hell is that redcoat welcome, Violet says, crossing her arms over her chest. Violet. Don't even start with me, David. She's not one of us, she says, and I cover my bare hand with my scarred one so I look like I belong. Am I the one who's bothered? Am I the only one who's bothered by this? She says. She's a rat. She's friends with Lewis. We're not friends. Lewis is just the only person who'll talk to me, I say. We're supposed to work together. You're a rat, Elamina, Violet says. And when I look over at David and Josephine, I can't tell if they agree or if they're nervous about something else. Violet, calm down, Rowan says. Maybe it's good to have someone keeping an eye on things. I mean, if she's got that red coat, it's better she's with us than against us. If she's willing to work with Lewis, she can't be trusted, Violet says. That's just facts, Rowan. I don't know, Violet. I think Rowan's right, David says. She's ruining everything, Violet says. There's barely enough work in the office as it is. God help me if I get sent to housekeeping on account of her. If she replaces me, I don't know what I'll do. There's nothing wrong with housekeeping, Josephine says. Not for you, Violet says, waving her arms and pouting her lips. Well, maybe when Elamina does take your job, she can arrange to put you in the field house instead. Violet gasps, and the two boys cover their mouths to stop themselves from laughing out loud. You'd certainly have plenty of work. There's plenty of manure for you to shovel there, Josephine says. Don't even think about it, Violet says to me. Josephine looks over at me and we both fight back a smile, covering our mouths and laughing along with the boys when we can't hold it in any longer. Violet huffs, and when the laughter doesn't stop, she reaches under a blanket and pulls out an old blue book, tossing it in front of her so it falls against the ground. Let's get on with things, she says, crossing her arms again. David reaches over and picks up the book, turning the pages gently until he reaches a spot near the center. When everyone is quiet and comfortably settled, he reads a poem about a dream that seems forgotten, a dream that's bright like the sun. I can feel Rowan watching me, studying my reaction as David sounds out words that flow together like music. When he pauses to clear his throat, Violet continues the poem from memory. She doesn't stop or pause or falter as she recites the words, but her voice gets quieter near the end, and I lean in so I can hear all about the whirling dreams that shatter darkness. When she finishes, I close my eyes, letting the words hover around me like a beam of light, flooding me with fire. What do you think, Elamina? Rowan whispers. I open my eyes and find all of them looking at me, waiting for me to speak, but I just shake my head because I don't know what to say, because I don't know how to put what I think and feel into words. Did you write that? I finally say to Violet. She shakes her head. I found it in my mother's side table. It's how I learned to read, and it's the only thing I brought from the gutter. It's the only thing I want to remember from that place. I think of all the books Mother made me study for school, poems and stories about men searching for big adventures that never made sense. I can't believe it. It's incredible, I say. What? Did you think we were idiots because we weren't raised in a fancy mainland city? Violet says. No, I didn't think that at all. I don't think that, I say, looking at Violet and then around at the others. That's not what I meant. Did you read a lot where you lived? David says, with an expression that's both kind and curious. Mother liked to read. She read to me a lot, and I read on my own, but nothing like this, I say. I didn't read much before I came, even less when I got here, Rowan says. I came when I was 7 years old, but when I heard those poems, I felt like you, Elamina, like it was a good song or a favorite meal from back home. It feels different, right? You've been here at Livingstone for that long? I say, and he shrugs with a smile that's more cheeks than mouth, like he's not sure if he's embarrassed or proud.
Imagine that like 20 times more louder, and everybody I'm sure is really enjoying this. I think you should read this every single time. It is a beautiful reading. I think it has like that moment of change in the book, it's really
Mm,
beautiful. I really like, it's made me fall in love with the book even more. So thank you, thank
mm,
you, thank you.
thank you.
JL, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your company. I am so thankful for the opportunity to host you. Thank you so much today.
Thank you all for being here.
Awesome. All right. So next month, folks, it is going to be my honor to do something different for I Have Been Wondering, because for the first time, I am going to be interviewing two authors at the same time rather than just one. The book, The Fifth, A Love's Story, is by MB Poisvert, who is a French author, French Canadian author, and it's translated by Monica Minigatti, who is a bilingual author, and it talks about polyamorous relationships. And I'm really, really thankful you folks are maybe going to join me next time and see that in action. For now, if you want a signed book plate, send JL an email on the contact page of her website, jlrichardson.com, and get yourself a signed plate, because that is amazing. I'm going to do that tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank
Yay.
you, everybody. And I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for coming. Bye, folks. Thank you so much, JL.
Thanks, Danny. That was great. That was lots of fun.
Thank you. All right, I'll see you. I'll see you
See you
around.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.